Hello and welcome to the Ministry Shift. Today we're taking a look at how the Zoom era might impact us all as part of a sprawling diocese. And to look at that, I'm joined by four people, each of whose role partly or wholly gives them responsibilities across the diocese. And they are Pete.
Hello, I'm Pete Bate and I'm the Director of Communications for the diocese.
Jeanette.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Hartwell, Ministry Enabler, which means I'm responsible for all the vocations and training that happens in the diocese.
Welcome to your first show, Jeanette, and also to Ben's first show.
Hi, I'm Ben Whitmore. I'm Vicar of Penn in Wolverhampton, but I'm also Chair of the House of Clergy.
And with a little bit of fanfare and excitement, we welcome back regular participant and host of the Ministry Shift, and I'm presuming Lichfield's first ever Episcopal vicar.
Hello, Matthew Parker. Yes, good to be back, and I am indeed an Episcopal vicar, but soon to be, pray God, Bishop of Stafford, pandemic permitting.
Welcome back, Matthew.
Thank you.
Over the last few months then, many in ministry have been learning how to re-establish their work and their networks using different kinds of input, gatherings and networking. That's been true of ministry, and it's also been true for many of us with roles across the diocese. And so my question today to kick off, and to come to you, Pete, first, is what have you learnt or noticed about that in your role so far?
I think in my role so far, I've noticed, as we sort of have like an overview of stuff that's happening across the diocese, how quickly and well churches have adapted to using Zoom, and people have adapted to using Zoom, whether that's to hold small group meetings or larger meetings, and just to incorporate it into their ministry. It's become something that's happened quite well and quickly, even in places you wouldn't expect it. And also, I suppose there's been new things that's brought as well in terms of inclusion for people who can't physically get to church or to other places, which has been really good. So it's been a steep learning curve for us, and often because we've been the people who've been asked for advice on it. But I think it's been a very positive thing.
Jeanette, is that true for you? Have you seen things adapt quickly?
Yeah, I think we had to adapt really quickly at the beginning of the first lockdown with programs that were already going on. So we needed to get those up and running. Quite a challenge in terms of adapting material that we were teaching, but overall it's been really good, and we've seen some really good advantages in terms of people not having to travel large distances to engage with the material. So yeah, overall really positive experience with Zoom, I think.
Ben, you're chair of the House of Clergy, which means that at points when diocesan synod gathers, you're in the chairing role.
Yeah.
What have you noticed? That's a big difference, isn't it? Tell me about that.
It is really. It's worked remarkably well. I think it's worked better than any of us really expected it to. It has a great advantage in the sense that in smaller groups, synods and chapters and things, I've noticed we've had a higher attendance actually at Zoom than we have normally when we've met physically. Also, diocesan synod and bishops' council work very well as well. Needs a bit of managing, but the voting systems work very well. It's been good that we haven't had to burn lots of rubber and burn lots of petrol to get across a large diocese. And I have to say, the meeting I chaired, the diocesan synod, I thought worked remarkably well. I think I think the limitation with Zoom is when things get emotional, or I wouldn't want to have a row with somebody on Zoom. I think as long as it's going quite well, I think Zoom is a very, very good tool. But as I said, I think if I was ever in a meeting which got difficult, I think I'd struggle a bit then. But generally speaking, I think it's worked really, really well. And I think the synod have been surprised how well it's worked. So,
thank you. And Matthew, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, like Ben, I'd say it's good for attendance. It's good for the environment. It does mean you can have more meetings in a day than you might otherwise have. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, I think remains to be seen. But certainly I could spend an hour getting to a meeting and then an hour in the meeting and an hour back, and that feels a bit disproportionate. So that's a positive. I think there are some significant drawbacks that Ben's already hinted at. We might want to go and talk about those, but certainly there have been occasions where I thought, actually, I think we're going to find it difficult to sort this particular thing out over Zoom. And if we could just get these people in a room and have the kind of proper personal interactions, then I think we might have got further. So thank God for Zoom, because we really, I think, stuck without it. But actually, I think we do need to recognise that for the future, it's not going to be the answer to everything.
That's pretty interesting, isn't it? So the emotional side of it can be more difficult. Do you think that that's something that we will probably never learn how to do, or do you think it's something that we kind of will adapt to in due course? Anybody really to that one?
Can I perhaps chip in there? Because I think in terms of us thinking about formation, obviously we can teach things over Zoom, but what I've noticed and what I've most missed is what I call the coffee break conversations. So obviously on Zoom, when you have a break, everybody disappears, cameras are switched off, everybody's on mute. And those would have been the time normally when I would have expected students or whoever to sort of, can I just have a word? Can I just check in with you about this? And it's those things really that I think we've missed and have been lacking. And of course, in terms of much of my work, we do quite a few residentials, and they're just not the same on Zoom, because we're not eating together, and all those things are important formational processes, and that's where it falls down a little bit. So yeah.
I mean, we are embodied people, we are people who have bodies. And one of the ways in which we understand one another are those kind of verbal, visual clues that we give off all the time that are incredibly difficult to read on Zoom. I mean, for instance, if you're preaching or whatever, when I tell one of my hilarious jokes, sometimes it's really quite difficult to know whether people share my sense of humour and appreciate the hilarity, because often the kind of there's a stiffness about it. I also think, though we've used it creatively, I'm not sure it's always a very creative medium for that kind of conversation. And going back to the kind of water cooler discussions that Jeanette's alluded to, I think that's often where not just you get some meaningful conversation, you get the creative conversations as well.
May I chip in there? I think another thing is there's a network for the chairs of the House of Clergy from across the country, because there's 42 dioceses, and there's a conference once a year where we all meet together. But also we used to go to London once a year as well for a sort of conversation in Church House. It's actually been really good because we've had some really good speakers talking across the country. We've been able to interface with other dioceses more easily, because you can do it with people in Newcastle, Durham, Truro, without everybody having to travel all the way into London for it. And I think some of those discussions we've had, there's a thing called a funeral symposium part of at the moment, which is a fascinating, David Primrose got me into, but being able to discuss with people a long way away without having to travel huge distances has been a very, very good. And you can also get some very busy speakers in. For example, if you wanted someone to talk to the diocesan synod, we could get somebody in from London to chip in for a quick 10-minute chat. So I think the possibilities for people from longer distances, I think there are advantages there as well. So
that's what I'm hearing is like really big advantages and really big disadvantages to what we've got at the moment. What do you think that kind of challenges us in terms of kind of stretching out into the years to come? How do we get the best of both worlds? Is that possible, or do we have to pick one world or the other?
I think for me, I would hope that we learn to find a balance between the two. I mean, I think there are definite advantages of being able to reach out to the outer ends of the diocese, if you like, and involve people in training and formation and those things where they might have felt it wasn't practicable because of the travelling, and as Matthew alluded to, you know, the amount of time spent travelling to a meeting and back, and all of that. So I wouldn't want to say that we would just, you know, the minute we're all let out again, we abandon Zoom, because I think it does have its uses. And I've been surprised even sometimes with one-to-one work, which before the lockdown I would have sort of absolutely said no. I think that has been slightly better on occasions. You can have those one-to-one conversations. I think it's harder, and I think there is definitely spaces where it does need to be. You need to be in a room together. But even with that, when I've had to do that on occasions, the lack of being able to do the physical gestures that we might do about the shaking hands in reconciliation or the giving each other a hug wasn't there anyway. So that felt quite odd as well. But I would hope we have a kind of mixed blend, mixed economy type thing.
If I could just mention something that we're actually starting this week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So one went out earlier today. We're going to be holding what we're calling parish support Zooms, which aren't just for clergy, but for anyone across the diocese, where basically at 2 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays throughout February, people can drop in for 45 minutes and ask questions of central officers about anything they want, really. But it'll be like surgeries, so it'll be different departments. The mission department with Simon will be on Thursday, and then there'll be other departments from across the central teams like safeguarding and finance. And vocations too. So if all the details of those are in the latest bulletin and will be in the next bulletin, if you don't get that, then if you email us at comms@lichfield.anglican.org, that's comms, C-O-M-M-S, then we will send the details to you.
I'll be in Thursdays, and I'm really looking forward to that, because again, it seems to open up a kind of conversation that might never have been able to have before. And potentially have people in the room who, you know, in this huge diocese might not have like just chanced across each other, really. So that's one of the things for me that excites me about Zoom, is the way that it kind of brings people together across the breadth of the diocese. Matthew, I wonder whether I could just go back to something that I think I heard you say earlier about just kind of being able to get through quite a lot on Zoom, perhaps because we're not traveling half so much as we were. And I certainly feel for myself that I'm probably more productive than I've ever been before. Is that kind of what you're finding too? Has that got limits?
Yes, I mean, I think and being productive is not the only thing we need to be. So I do think you can get through more, and there's a danger there, because inevitably you can cram more stuff in, and perhaps it's greater in volume but less significant in its depth. But and I think there just needs to be a process of discernment in all this, doesn't there? And one of the things we'll have to do over the next few years is just decide what things are best done on Zoom and what isn't best done person to person. And I suspect some of them more transactional. I don't think anything between human beings is ever purely transactional, but the business type meeting does work very well and includes a whole load of people in. But I for example, actually struggle with worship online. I confess this to you now, brothers and sisters. And why is that? Well, it might be my own inability to concentrate or engage, but I suspect there's something more to it about being present to people in those ways.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one thing lockdown has encouraged us to do is to try things online we never would have tried before. And my suspicion is that before we were concerned about trying it online because we thought people would do that instead of coming to church. I think the creative side of it, I mean, we get far more people watching us on a Sunday. I get 300 or 400 views every morning on a morning talk, far more than ever used to get before lockdown. And my hope is that actually, when we emerge from lockdown, we may come out stronger. It may have widened our fringe, so to speak, our ecclesiastical fringe, and actually we may end up with more people than we came in before. So rather than pulling people away from church, it's actually widened our horizons, and we may actually end up becoming a bigger church because of it afterwards. I think it's the way we've either engaged with it or not. But I'm quite excited. I'm hoping that, I say, when we emerge from lockdown, that the church will come out stronger than when he went in. Is my hope.
So that task of weaving together the virtual and the real still lies ahead of us. Look forward to watching these guys and many others in the diocese face that. Ben, Jeanette, Pete and Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you too to Simon Jones, who does all of the work behind the scenes. And thank you for joining us. Next week's show looks at self-care. How do we look after ourselves in ministry when so many of the things that we would normally lean on for sustenance and renewal have also shifted under our feet? So look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, do please share the show with anyone you think might get something from it. Goodbye.